Alan Wake is a third-person horror action game developed by Remedy Entertainment, creators of Max Payne and Control, the latter game I previously reviewed on this channel. I'll provide a link for it, though honestly that video isn't very good because I was still early in my YouTube reviewer career and didn't really know what I was doing. Now that I'm at least mildly more experienced, here's hoping things are a little better this time around. Anyway, back when Alan Wake was first released in 2010, I didn't have an Xbox nor a PC that could have run it without bursting into flames. I have to admit, of the many games in my life I've been disappointed I never got to play, Alan Wake had to rank up toward the top. So with October here, I figured what better time to finally dive into this much lauded title. And I have to say, the game definitely lives up to its reputation. Alan Wake is a moody, fun, and memorable experience that I'm thrilled to have finally played. So with that being said, let's get into my thoughts on it.
Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one. The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and is what we'll remember in the end. My name is Alan Wake. I'm a writer.
In games with any kind of horror or suspense element, atmosphere is everything, and Alan Wake absolutely nails this. From the moment the game begins, the whole setting is just bubbling with an uneasy feeling of dread that is just mysterious enough to intrigue, but not so overbearing as to agitate. The calm, cool tone in which Matthew Peretta delivers the game's opening narration sets the stage perfectly for the journey players are about to embark on. The setting Remedy chose for the game, a desolate mining town in the mountain ranges of Washington state named Bright Falls, is clearly a homage to several different iconic locations featured in Western horror. You have the vast mountainous landscapes and quirky small town of Twin Peaks, meshed with the foreboding forests and lakeside cabin of Friday the 13th. Later in the game, you explore a vast hedge maze ripped straight from The Shining, and abandoned farmhouses that could pass for being right out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, complete with your very own Leatherface to chase you around. More on that in a bit, though. This is all to say that from its very beginning, Alan Wake clearly shows itself to be a love letter to American horror, and this adoration of the genre is steeped in everything the game does. One of the coolest additions in this regard are the Night Springs episodes you find on TVs scattered throughout the levels. Each of these is a small 2-minute or so long video featuring a cheesy Twilight Zone knockoff called Night Springs, and I stopped to watch every single one. It really is amazing how many different horror film atmospheres this game manages to borrow from and still have the experience not feel overstuffed. Graphically, this game has held up pretty damn well over the past decade. The textures are solid with a few exceptions, but Remedy makes clever use of shadows and light to cover up a lot of those blemishes. The lighting in general is just fantastic and goes a long way in setting up the game's dark and moody atmosphere. Given how strong a role light plays within the story too, it was obviously important for the devs to nail this aspect, and to say they knocked it out of the park would be an understatement. Walking through the shadowy woodland trails or the tight corridors of an abandoned building with only the faint shine of your flashlight and the occasional street light flickering in the distance is as unnerving as it gets. While the powerful burst of your flashbangs and flare gun burn with such weight and velocity that you feel like an absolute god for that small fleeting moment they light up the screen. Alan Wake has such a fantastic atmosphere that I loved exploring from the first time I started the game up to the very last scene when the credits rolled. The one area the visuals fall short for me is the character models. more specifically the facial animations. They just are not very good, even by the standards of 2010. Alan has this weird thing where whenever he talks, he looks like Brack from Space Ghost, and Alice's face is permanently stuck in that uncanny valley, putting her in the running for most terrifying part of the game. The supporting cast suffers from this problem as well, though none of them except for Barry have as much screen time as Alan or Alice, so it's not quite as overt. Outside of this, the rest of the animations do seem to have this weird jankiness to them that makes the characters all seem to move as though they have bricks tied to their ankles. This is in stark contrast to the possessed who, even at their slowest, move with the stalking precision of Michael Myers, and at their best move like a velociraptor on PCP. It's likely this was an intentional design choice, however, as main characters who lumber around juxtaposed with enemies who skate through the map are pretty commonplace in survival horror, so I won't criticize the game too harshly for it. I'm just not a fan of how awkward the movement looks and feels at times. Audio-wise, Alan Wake is damn near perfect. The soundtrack, composed by Petri Alanko, is absolutely masterful. The way it ranges between powerful symphonies and soft as a feather melodies fits the mood of the game to a T. The singles contributed by Poets of the Fall and Old Gods of Asgard are also of exceptional quality, with the latter's music being used for one of the coolest sequences in the game. I enjoyed the soundtrack for Control a lot too, but dare I say this is even better. So I can only conclude Remedy has an exceptional ear for these sorts of decisions. The sound design is equally fantastic. The faint heartbeats and breaths that echo thinly in the background as you wander the empty forests made the experience so immersive I could practically feel the cold night air brushing against my face. Each weapon sounds crisp and clean, particularly the shotgun. And let's be real here, every survival horror game needs to have a good sounding shotgun. The voice acting is solid, with Matthew Peretta and Fred Berman standing out the most for me, as the title character Alan Wake and his literary agent slash best friend Barry Wheeler respectively. The rest of the cast was decent enough, with the only dud for me being FBI agent Robert I Know Author's Name's Nightingale.
Get him up, Hemingway! Stay right where you are, Spillane! Nowhere to run now, Dan Brown!
That's right, James Joyce. It's your fault, and you're gonna pay for it.
Well, I've got you now, Raymond Chandler.
We get it, dude. You read. I don't know if this was the actor's delivery, the sound direction, or the writing, but either way, he was definitely the black sheep of the cast for me. Overall, I would say the presentation of this game is top-notch, with a fantastically crafted and memorable setting that oozes style, backed up with stellar sound design and more than serviceable voice acting.
Cauldron Lake.
There's no island on Cauldron Lake, not since the big eruption in the 70s.
Please, I can take you there, okay?
You look like you've taken a pretty bad knock to the head. Are you okay?
Listen.
We'll figure this out. Please get in the car. We'll swing by the lake and then we'll go to the station, okay? Mr. Wake, have you seen Stucky, the guy who owns this place?
I realized I couldn't tell her what had happened in the forest. She wouldn't have believed me, and then she wouldn't have helped me with Alice.
The story centers around crime fiction author Alan Wake, who has lost his writing mojo after completion of his most recent novel, which wrapped up a long-running series he'd been writing that appears to have been his most popular work and also a clear homage to Max Payne. Stuck in the midst of a 2-year stretch of writer's block, Alan and his wife Alice embark on a vacation to the small town of Bright Falls. Things quickly take a turn for the weird when, en route to their destination, Alan has a vivid nightmare where he is chased by shadowy figures through the forest, and only survives with the help of a talking light which appears to him and guides him to safety. This section also functions as the game's tutorial, But we're not quite at gameplay yet, so let me pump the brakes some. Waking up and arriving in town, you get a chance to meet the locals, who range from strange to really fucking strange. After acquiring a key they believe to be for their rental cabin, the Wakes are off to their destination, and this is where things start to pick up. At the cabin, Alice reveals to Alan that their getaway was a ploy to try and reinvigorate his creativity. Upon realizing this, Alan becomes very angry and dislodges his jaw in a display of dominance before storming out of the cabin. Shortly after, the power cuts out, leaving Alice, who has an extraordinary fear of the dark, alone inside. Alan rushes back to her side only to see a black entity pull her into the murky depths of the lake below. Alan dives in to rescue her, which results in him blacking out and waking up a week later inside of a crashed car on the side of the road. Alone in the woods and running for his life from the dark entities that were in his earlier dream, Alan must piece together what happened and race against the clock to find and rescue Alice. The rest of the game takes place over the next several days and is broken down in a 6-episode format. Each episode runs for about an hour to an hour and a half, making the game's overall runtime on the shorter end of the spectrum. Even taking my time to explore each level, find all of the hidden caches, watch all of the Night Springs episodes, and take breaks with the game still running on my computer, I finished all 6 chapters in about 10 hours. This short runtime means the story moves at a very brisk pace, and no one area is dwelled on for too long. Depending on who you are, this will be a good or bad thing. Someone who wants a more slow burn type of experience will probably feel disappointed with how quick the game moves through its story beats. If you're someone who doesn't really have time to sit through longer games and want something you can finish quickly, this will be right up your alley. The story also provides some really funny and lighthearted moments that are just enough to bring some levity into the brooding world, but not so much it turns into parody. I can see some not liking this so much, since a lot of people enjoy the darkness and despair of games like Silent Hill and Outlast more than something that doesn't have an issue with stopping and winking at the audience every so often. But to me, these moments were great outside of the FBI librarian. Another issue I could see people having is the lack of mystery behind the big reveal toward the end of the game. They don't tell you so much that it ruins everything altogether, but Hereditary this is not. Everything that happens in Alan Wake is explained to the player, with little room for interpretation by the time the credits roll. It's not a terrible choice, but if you like horror shrouded in secrecy, you will probably feel let down. The game's ending actually comes kind of suddenly too, which did catch me off guard a bit. Remedy seemed to realize this as they released 2 more epilogue episodes as DLC. Unfortunately, these don't really elaborate enough on the story to be worth your time, and the gameplay in them is subpar compared to the base game, so I can't really recommend them. There is another DLC called American Nightmare, in which you play through an episode of Night Springs as Alan, but I don't own that, so I can't comment on it. The reception to it seems to have been mixed for whatever that's worth. All that being said, I will likely pick it up to review sometime in the future, so I'll be sure to give my thoughts when I do. Overall, I think the story is solid, and the low time commitment asked of the player to finish it makes it worth the price of entry nowadays. It's a very good, though very short story that doesn't end up with as mysterious a conclusion as you might think based off the first couple chapters, but keeps you intrigued throughout the entire runtime.
I will kill your wife.
Alan Wake can most basically be described as a third-person shooter. You're a dude who runs around with guns and shoots monsters. Though with a bit of a twist. Every enemy you encounter is shrouded in a dark energy that makes them impervious to bullets. To get around this, Alan will need to shine light onto them via his flashlight or light-emitting weapons such as a flashbang to make the energy dissipate and allow them to be killed. This is a very cool concept, as it takes the standard survival horror gameplay loop and jazzes it up a bit. Not only are enemies impervious to damage before having their shroud stripped away, but they also attack more aggressively, do more damage, and move much more quickly. As stated earlier, I do feel like the movement for Alan is a bit labored, but this serves the gameplay as you will often be in a position where you can't outrun enemies and instead must use the environment to your advantage to pick off each taken as quickly as possible. This means the game is, in my opinion, at its best when you are given a fairly wide open area to work with. Alan's dodge move is serviceable but far from great, and the few times during the main game where you find yourself stuck in a small area stuffed with enemies can be mildly frustrating, as our hero's lack of mobility will get you killed quite a bit. The handful of instances where I had to just run for my life from a huge mob were as infuriating as they were fun, due to Alan having the stamina of a late-stage lung cancer patient who still smokes half a carton a day. To be fair to Remedy here, you aren't nearly as inundated with enemies as you are in, say, Control, so 90% of the time you will be confronted by a group that is more than manageable in size, with plenty of room to operate. There's also a healthy selection of weapons for dealing with large groups, such as flashbangs, flares, and the flare gun, but more on the weapons in a bit. Spread throughout the map are street lights that eliminate any enemies on your tail when you step under them, heal you, and function as checkpoints. The game's level design is fairly linear, with these lights serving as a guide for where to go next. That being said, exploration is also highly encouraged due to the caches of ammo and weapons found hidden throughout the maps. These are fairly easy to locate, and although opening one will usually spawn a mob of enemies immediately after, I say it's more than worth it to go back and look for them, as doing so will keep you topped off on supplies for most of the game. The weapons are pretty basic, with the lineup featuring pistols, shotguns, a hunting rifle, flares, flare guns, and my personal favorite, flashbangs. There is nothing more satisfying than blowing up 4 or 5 enemies who are closing in on you with a flashbang, and it's something that never got old for me even by the end of the game. The weapons are all fairly balanced, though I personally feel like the hunting rifle is a bit on the weak side when compared to the others, and considering you have to pick between carrying it or a shotgun, I chose the latter almost every time. The gunplay is a bit janky due to the fact you don't have a reticle for aiming. Instead, your flashlight functions as a sort of guide for where Alan fires. If that sounds tedious, don't worry though, because it's not nearly as bad as you're probably thinking. The flashlight controls fairly well, and the aiming is solid most of the time. Speaking of which, your flashlight is easily as important as any weapon I just named, as you will be using it not just for aiming, but to burn away the dark energy covering the taken. This starts off as a basic dollar store flashlight, then is eventually upgraded to an LED lantern, which burns the dark energy away much faster. Don't get too attached to your upgrades though, as at the end of each level you revert back to just a pistol and the bottom tier flashlight. This wasn't something I was a huge fan of at first, but the game is clearly designed with it in mind. Enemy mobs tend to be of a lower intensity at the beginning of a chapter, picking up as you start to reach the end, while upgrades, hidden caches, and supplies are so plentiful throughout the map that allowing you to carry things over into the next level would quickly trivialize any challenge the game possesses. In fact, weapons and ammo are so plentiful, I could see survival horror purists being a bit disappointed, as inventory management in this game is essentially non-existent. Just save a few flashbangs and flare gun rounds for the inevitable big fight at the end of each level, and you'll be good to go. Even on its hardest difficulty, all that is affected is how long it takes for energy to be burned off of the taken, and how much damage Alan takes. So don't go in expecting Resident Evil 2 on hardcore or anything. Enemy design is fairly mundane, and even given the game's short runtime, this is a bit disappointing. Smaller Taken will either run up and slash at you, or get within medium range of Alan to throw projectiles, the lone exception being the Norman Bates clones on crack, though their appearances are sadly few and far between. The larger Taken will stalk toward you and attempt to bull rush when close enough. Almost all carry an axe, but the upgraded versions will have chainsaws. Though sadly, much like their PCP addicted little brethren, the chainsaw wielders don't show up all that much. The other less noteworthy enemy you encounter are a possessed flock of ravens who torpedo at Alan from any and all directions. A lot of people seem to hate these things, and they're clearly meant to be agitating, but I feel like this is balanced out by the comparatively small damage they dish out, unlike other enemies who fly in from off-screen, and the relatively minuscule amount of them in the game. Still, this clearly seems to be an enemy you're either going to hate fighting or feel entirely indifferent about. I don't think anyone will be buying t-shirts of them or starting a fan page on Facebook anytime soon. Boss fights in this game are either enemies who become basic encounters later in the game, or possessed vehicles and objects. Yeah, let's talk about those. The possessed vehicle fights are mostly fun as long as you're not also in a vehicle, as I'll touch on in a second. Running for my life from a possessed tractor that was trying to mow me down like a wheat stalk was honestly pretty cool. And despite getting wrecked by these things quite a few times, I really enjoyed the fights against them. What I enjoyed substantially less, however, were the random possessed objects you encounter. Tires, dumpsters, refrigerators, and more will become overtaken by dark energy and fling themselves at you from all directions, doing incredibly high damage. When you couple this with the janky movement, it becomes very agitating, as even accidentally walking into one laying on the ground registers as a hit according to the game. I hated these things more than any other enemy. There's nothing like a tire flying in from off screen and taking you out when you can't see it coming to make someone nerd rage. Thankfully, these encounters aren't that common, but I'll be damned if they aren't among the most annoying things in Bright Falls. The game makes up for this lack of enemy variety with some pretty awesome set pieces, however. There are areas where you get to use a spotlight as a turret, camps where construction lights are laying around to be used as a sort of claymore while hordes of enemies rush at you, and my personal favorite, a sequence where you take on a massive wave of enemies while standing on a stage used for an old metal band. Here you fight off the mobs rushing you while Barry uses pyrotechnics to assist, nuking groups of Taken every minute or so.
God damn.
So while the enemies may not have much variety, the game's awesome set pieces do a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to keeping the encounters fresh and exciting, with one exception. The driving sequences in this game are straight cancer. The car controls so stiff and rigid it makes you wonder if they all had Viagra dropped in their gas tanks, and the camera to pan around the car is locked into 180-degree turns for some reason, making it more than a chore to look right or left. For the most part, you can get by because you'll usually be fighting against enemies on foot. The couple of times the game makes you fight another possessed vehicle, however, these shortcomings become maddening, as keeping track of where the enemy is while it torpedoes around you with you only having a stiff camera and awkwardly controlling vehicle to fight back is the textbook definition of tedious. I'm not expecting Gran Turismo from a survival horror, but they could have definitely improved this aspect. Something that can also be said of the DLC episodes. After you beat the game, you will gain access to 2 DLC episodes that function as epilogues for the main story, and these are honestly best skipped. As far as story is concerned, you can summarize what they both add in 2 sentences, and from a gameplay standpoint, they are extremely irritating. It's like they take everything that is unlikable about the game's combat and double down on it during these bonus chapters. You will often fight large mobs of Taken in cramped areas with little supplies and be put through encounters where you have to rely on Alan's fat kid in gym class level of cardio. From a narrative standpoint, it makes sense for you to be in these kind of situations, but given how little these 2 episodes add to the overall story, I don't think it's worth putting yourself through the pain. If you are a glutton for punishment though, they are available for free with the PC version, so at least you won't have to spend money if you do play them. If you're playing on Xbox where you still have to buy these, then I would definitely say it's a hard pass. If you want to spend money to get your crotch stepped on, there's much better options. Overall, the gameplay is flawed but acceptable. A lack of enemy variety and some poorly designed encounters drag some sections down a bit, but this is made up for with some really awesome set pieces and level design. While I would say this is the weakest area of the game, that speaks more to the high quality of every other aspect than it does some huge failing on the gameplay's part.
I didn't want to go outside. Cops had to be looking for me. The noon sun turned the place into a sauna. The day dragged on. Different scenarios ran through my mind, ways of how I'd torture the kidnapper to get Alice back, or the different horrible things he could have done to her. I imagined her dead. I had no way of knowing she was still alive. It was killing me. I was running on blind hope. It was all a waste of time. The bastard never showed up.
Alan Wake is definitely a game worthy of its reputation, though I would stop short of calling it a masterpiece. It is a game with a beautifully crafted world, good characters with one exception, a solid story despite the spoon-fed nature of it, and serviceable gameplay with some interesting ideas and awesome sequences. I would highly recommend this game for anyone who is into third-person shooters or horror games. Even if you're on the fence, the short game length ensures that there won't be much of a time loss if you do pick it up and don't like it. 8.5 out of 10. In channel news, there's a lot of awesome games coming out in the next few months I'm excited for. I'm already working on recording for my next game, which is definitely not 10 hours long, so it may be my review for next month or get pushed to December. I'm trying to maintain at least one video a month, and with working a full-time job, the shorter games definitely help with that. But I also don't want to neglect longer titles because there are a lot of good ones that I'd like to cover. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel so the YouTube algorithm will show me some love. Also, feel free to check out some of my other reviews if you want to see more like this. Thanks a lot for watching and supporting my channel. I will see you guys and gals next time.